First things first, welcome to the show, Lucas. I appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk to us a little bit about the SSLo troubleshooting guide. It's funny when you review a piece of documentation and do a piece on it, but really this document is pretty special to me. It was nice that you shared some of the things that you did, and I can't wait to go over just kind of the overall flow of the doc itself with you. But before we kind of dive into it, I was hoping you could introduce yourself and let the viewers know what you do for F5.
Great. Yeah, my name is Lucas Thompson. I've worked for F5 for coming up on 15 years now. It's been
Wow.
it's been a journey. That's for sure. I started out in tech support, supporting the SSL VPN product called FirePass that F5 used to sell. It later transitioned over to Access Policy Manager, or APM. And I've been working on APM and its related offshoot products, including SSLo, since that time. I've moved on from being a direct tech support to basically training tech support. So I do tech support training and making sure that for the new features that F5 is producing, that there's sufficient material about troubleshooting it. So troubleshooting documentation, debugging documentation.
So is that it's NPI? Is that correct? That's
F5 has a group that is responsible for training support, and that organization was called New Product Introduction. So I am a New Product Introduction engineer. At F5, our NPI group is for introducing new products to internal customers, or internal users of the content, and the people that are going to have to be supporting customers. So F5 has sort of two NPI groups. One's internal and one's external.
I've benefited from the internal guys many times.
That's great.
Oh yeah, yes it is. It's probably great for my customers.
That's great. That's great. I've always loved how flexible the product was, and it's really gratifying to talk to somebody on the phone, or read lists of requirements and lists of, like, I want to implement this business case and this business case, and can you do all this stuff? And the answer is always yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do it for sure. The product is flexible enough to accomplish basically anything.
It's funny you say that, because Brian McHenry, who is a pretty good friend of the show, used to say to me all the time, it's not whether you can do it, but whether you should.
For sure.
Also, before we get too far into the document, I have to ask you about that card catalog behind you. That's fascinating stuff. It's not often you see a card catalog anymore, but it's there. So can you tell me about
They're
it?
becoming more and more rare, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
So this one, I found it on Craigslist locally, and it was owned by an old retired machinist who obtained it from the Seattle Ford Model A assembly plant that used to be on South Lake Union, where Amazon has been building up a lot of office buildings lately. So this card catalog held Ford Model A parts when it was first used. So it's fun to now use it to hold Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and electronic components.
Absolutely. It's like an analog database or something. So that's cool. I had to ask about that one too. But if we can sort of dive into the document a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and share this here. So if I take a look at the document, for me, I ended up, when I just did a Google search on this, it ended up bringing me right to the architecture overview, which I thought was great. I did.
Interesting.
Yeah, I did. I found a link directly to it, and it caught my eye. Not the intro that caught my eye, but in the Google search, the architecture overview got it. So,
Mm.
as I took a look at that, it's it's clear that you've got a good diagram here that shows exactly how the control plane is laid out. And when I was going through the page here, one of the things that kind of blew my mind was the APM daemon, and that being involved directly in the data plane. Now, my experience in configuring SSLo is admittedly a little bit low, and I've done mostly inbound SSLo, which is not typical, not as typical, I should say, a use case, right? So, can you tell me a little bit about APM in the data plane diagram here? Is that a back-end resource for SSL Orchestrator, or is that used to build policy? Is that,
So SSLo has its own system for generating policies. It's kind of like firewall rules. It's a list of conditions that you can match, and then if those conditions match, then you move on and perform some action. APM uh, doesn't, it operates more like a flowchart, right? It operates as a series of agents that flow into the next selected agent depending on the outcome of the previous agent. So the way that APM works and the way that SSLo works are pretty different. Um, and SSLo implements a translation layer between SSLo policies and APM policies, but it actually uses APM as the back end. So while you're creating a list of like rules that sort of look like firewall rules in SSLo, it gets translated to access policies in APM, which you can use the BIG-IP GUI to go look at.
okay. Thank you. That was for my particular use case, it wasn't APM was not something that I knew was even involved in the slightest. So that's neat.
One other tiny little bit about that is that recently SSLo allows you to insert your own access policy into a flow so that you can have multiple APM policies attached to SSLo. So you can implement custom logic using that same APM interface that you might be familiar with already.
And modifiable, or is there anything special that you need to do for that, like you would for an IAP? You have to uncheck strict. Is there anything kind of analogous in SSL Orchestrator for that you're aware of?
There is the this the strictness that is part of IAPS was removed from SSLo. So it used to be that SSLo did operate in that strict mode. So you had to use the SSLo UI to make changes. We got rid of that a couple of versions back. So it no longer operates in strict mode because it was too there wasn't really a benefit to it, because when people need to make changes, they need to make them, and us stopping them from making changes just really added to the frustration of using the product. It was an impediment to using the product. So instead of using strict mode, it now there's a whole process that reconciles the existing configuration with the SSLo derived configuration, and those two are constantly reconciled. So if you go make changes outside of SSLo can detect those changes. It's not a passive participant. It's actively checking that it's the configuration and its dependent configuration objects continuously.
So at the end of this guy, clicking next is going to take me right into the fault ID chart, right? So with this is where I kind of went, wait a minute, this is not your average document. like because
Right.
looking at the document, and sure, we have things that are clickable and nice, but this is a very simple and easy to follow flowchart of potential errors. To me, I've not seen anything like this in other F5 documents that I can think of. Was there kind of an inspiration for this, or this flow, or?
So um, there's some history to it. So I was brought in kind of late into like this NPI role in SSLo. So there was a lot of existing data about problems that customers were having or issues they were facing in configuration. So there was a lot of support. There was a lot of support tickets that we could mine for information. So what we did is we went through all of the, well, not all because there's a lot, but we picked a sample of support cases that customers had opened up with us, and traced back all of the common problems and resolutions into categories. And we took all those categories and tried to arrange them in a way that kind of made sense, in a way that sort of logically flowed, and that we could categorize into the categories that you're seeing on this chart. So there's control plane problems, and there's data plane problems, and those were kind of separate categories that we were able to take apart from the common problems that customers were having. So when we were trying to figure out how to present this information, we looked at common ways to approach that problem. And common ways are perhaps having a table of problems. So there's a list. There's like one table of problems. If you see this problem, do this thing. And if you see this problem, do this thing. And it's just a linear list, right? Those didn't seem very approachable. They didn't seem flexible, or they didn't seem flexible enough to really present the problems like we wanted to present them. So we wanted to present symptoms in a more kind of granular way. So we kind of decided on this flowchart arrangement for symptoms.
Like a decision tree.
It's like a decision tree, and it's allowed us to kind of present that information in a different way, and it's kind of exciting to see if people are gonna jibe with this presentation or they're not. I guess we're gonna see based on the feedback that we get. But so far, the feedback has been pretty positive.
Well, yeah, it sounds to me like, first of all, what you're saying is that we have built the document based on existing customer issues. That's a true statement,
Mm-hmm.
yes?
Exactly.
So
Yep.
then I guess my follow-up question would be, does this document become kind of a living document that is maybe versioned and we just continue to add to it as we get more issues or things like that? Is that the intent?
That's exactly the intent. There's feedback forms on this doc, and the eventual goal is to be able to accept input from people where they're directly inserting content via Git, right? So they can send us a pull request, and we can decide to integrate it or not, or accept those changes. We're not there yet, but we hope to be there in the relatively near future. There's a lot of value in how administrators actually using the product are able to see and are able to think about the problems and issues they're facing, versus us just kind of guessing what they're going to run into, right? As we're some of the worst users of the product, because we're too close to it, right? So we have a lot of information that we know about how the product was developed and about how the product is used that might not jibe with somebody who is coming into it without all that information. So this document is an effort to simplify the presentation, and also to get people to kind of think about it in a different way, to think about the product in a way that's presented in these charts.
Yeah. Well, I think it's fascinating, and I guess for me, I'd love to see, as someone who's been consuming F5 documents for a very long time. Gotta be, since 2008 or so, something like that. Yeah, 2007. I'd love to see more documents like this. Are there other documents that are being considered to be modeled like this?
We're currently in the process of figuring out what other troubleshooting documentation can be moved to this format. Absolutely, because there's a lot of value here, and being able to create these kind of flowcharts and this kind of representation of information, I think it has a lot of value, and a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? If we can draw an arrow from one component to another component, that it's so much better to say it that way than it is kind of writing that out in a paragraph, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, when you look at this, one of the things that I didn't show is that when you actually do click on just a random element, right? HA sync errors, this is going to take me exactly to all of the stuff that I would need if I was experiencing, this kind of error. So I love it. I really do.
That's exactly the idea. The other motivation for creating this document is that we had a control plane troubleshooting tool called SSLo fix that we needed to document, which we were like, well, let's just put that in this guide. Let's just put the documentation for that tool in this troubleshooting guide, and using the same mechanism, using the same kind of flow chart. In this case, we're using these diagrams to indicate program flow, right? This is how this SSLo control plane fix script works, depending on the options that you select. So you can get it to run in diagnostic mode or repair mode, etc. So this SSLo fix tool is used to repair a lot of the control plane problems with SSLo that can happen, which is at least partially related to the strict mode stuff that we were talking about earlier.
Oh, okay. So now this tool, is this something that would typically be run with the help of support, or are customers able to download this on their own?
Yeah, both. Part of the point of this guide is to put customers on similar footing to support folks at F5. So they're both operating from the same information, and customers don't feel like they're in the dark, right? So customers have this information about how to use this tool, and support also has this information about how to use the tool.
Fantastic. Killing two birds with one stone.
And it helps people understand each other, right? It helps people understand, get in each other's shoes, and have empathy for the kind of problems we face, right? As engineers, we want things to work, we want things to function correctly, and we want people to be happy with how things are functioning.
I guess are there any other kind of parting thoughts or overarching ideas that you want to get across to the F5 community about this?
We love feedback. We live on feedback, and if anyone reading this document has any suggestions for how to improve it, how to clarify the information in it, or other products that you think could benefit from this kind of documentation, we'd love to hear it. Okay, so on the bottom of all these pages, there is a feedback link that you can use that it immediately opens a ticket to our team where we get to review that, and we will respond quickly to the feedback requests.
Okay. Well, I guess thank you again for stopping by, Lucas. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope to be seeing more cool stuff like this come my way from you in the future.
That's super. Thanks so much, Aubrey.